Okay, welcome to Tech Tuesday number 54. And today we're going to talk about how your IP grows. Like a tree, you plant it and it gets bigger and nicer and whatever. Before we start, take a moment. There's still 59 hostages, just waiting for them to come home. I don't know how many are familiar with the nursery rhyme, Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? But it's the same question, how does your IP portfolio grow? And what we're going to talk about is how it grows, why it grows or not, should it grow, it's not so clear, and portfolios can also shrink. And we're going to talk a little bit about some special cases of growing. Now, when you think about being an IP manager, your job is to provide service to a company. And even though it's not always done, the most important part of your job is answering the question, how does the IP interact with the company? Give it more value, deal with company goals, avoid problems, and so on. But, we have to be honest, and the IP itself is also valuable. And being a valuable asset, it should be managed. And in a startup company, the company is always growing. Sometimes they pop, but usually they grow. So it is natural to expect that also the IP portfolio will grow. So the natural condition is companies with IP portfolios growing. Who manages the growth of the IP portfolio? The answer is IP management. And that is what we're going to talk today. What does managing the growth of the IP portfolio entail? First, we'll talk about what we usually see, which of course I wish we wouldn't, except in the competitors. Usually the growth is in fits and starts, grows, stops. It often starts late. The minute management feels they don't have any tension, that they don't need IP, stops growing. Then at some time later, maybe 3 years later, the companies wake up, there's some sort of crisis or an investment and say, oh, we have to make our IP portfolio bigger. Let's grow it. And in the middle, if somebody identifies some great invention, you file a patent. And once you feel that you have finished technical R&D, then the portfolio stops growing. This is a very familiar growth pattern. And as you can tell, this is definitely not being managed. This is being determined by outside forces which don't have much to do with the value of the IP portfolio. So when you talk about the IP portfolio growing, what does it mean to grow? Well, first you can have the number of IP items, how many patents, how many freedom to operate opinions, and so on. Second, you can talk about the coherence of the IP portfolio, and usually IP portfolio has more than one focus. You can talk about how many focuses does a portfolio have. The portfolio can grow deeper or it can go broader. It can increase in intrinsic value, which is, how much you could sell those patents for. And it can increase in extrinsic value, which means how good is they for the company. The growth could be tactical or strategic. Also, the items in your portfolio can be created for tactical or strategic reasons. It can grow in the direction of IP items that are high probability of being useful, or those that have a low probability of being useful. Cost and value can grow, and it can grow for now or it can grow for later. So all of these are different kinds of growing that we can talk about, but usually when somebody talks about the portfolio growing, they mean more patents, more patent families. So why does it grow? One type is reactive. Some sort of event happens. In response to that event, you grow. Another type is invention-based. You make an invention, you make a discovery, file a patent, your portfolio gets bigger. There's something called IP design. I'll talk about it a bit more in a second. That you have some sort of goal or vision for the company, and you use that to decide how much your portfolio should grow. And you can actually be proactive. You can decide that you need to grow and that it's a goal of the company, and there's all sorts of ways of doing it, including conducting experiments specifically for growth. A completely different way of growing your portfolio is buying it. You can buy a company with a portfolio, you can just buy patents, you can license in. Another way of growing your portfolio is what I call setup. And I'll talk more about it later, but basically, depending how you set up your company, other people can be creating your IP portfolio for you. Closely related to that is the issue of compounding. If you make an invention, then you're more likely to make another further invention, and so on. So they build upon each other. And last but not least, there's streamlining. If all you do is reduce the amount of friction you have in the company, your portfolio will grow automatically. And I'll talk about that in a minute as well. Proactive, reactive, and passive growth. And I'll skip right to the end. You need all of them in order to achieve quality growth. What is reactive IP growth? So some sort of event or market signal cause you to decide that you need to grow the portfolio. And here's a few examples. Your investor tells you. One of your inventors says, I invented it and I want you to increase your portfolio. You get a cease and desist letter. Somebody says you're infringing. That usually wakes people up to talk about IP. Or you can just look at competitor portfolios, either by doing benchmarking. Oh my, they have 20 patents. We also need 20 patents. Or by fear, they have a lot of patents we might be infringing. We got to do something about it. Okay, so that's all reactive to external events. Passive IP growth means we don't care what's happening outside. Things automatically make us grow. For example, you can have rules and processes in the company which cause IP growth. You can have an automatic system where people make inventions, submit them to a patent committee, and whatever. You can have a company that says every 3 months we're going to file a patent. And you can have periodic evaluation of your IP portfolio. And if you do that periodically, you will realize periodically that maybe your IP portfolio needs to change. But the most common type of passive IP growth is invention-driven. Somebody invents something, everybody gets excited, you file a patent. And there's proactive growth. Okay, a company goal can be, we want to grow. And in proactive growth, you always consider the needs of the company and the current IP state. But at the extreme, imagine that you fund experiments or even R&D in order to find new inventions. And you might ask yourself, why would I do that? Let's say you develop a machine which measures some property of the human body. but you only invented it in order to give therapy to broken bones. But this machine can be used for other things as well. There's no question that people are going to buy your machine and use it not for broken bones, but for other applications. So you should be the one to own the IP on that. Okay? And the only way you're going to own the IP is if you use the machine yourself for uses that are not broken bones in order to determine what it can do and then file patents on that. In any case, like I said, all of these methods need to be used. Any one of them by itself has a problem. And let's look in particular at the two leading paradigms for IP portfolio growth, which are IP design and invention driven. And I'm saying the two leading paradigms, but there's no question that invention driven is a winner. Okay, I'm putting IP design first because it's probably more important. So in IP design, you plan out what the company needs based on its vision or the goals. And then you ask yourself, how will I obtain the IPs that the company needs? The outcome is a more balanced IP portfolio because you have an IP portfolio which was designed to do what the company needs. That's good. Of course, you need support in the higher echelons of the company. More common is invention driven. That's really the default. Whenever somebody comes up with an invention, or maybe you looked for inventions, we'll talk about that in a minute, then you decide, hopefully you decide if and how to protect it in a way that advances what the company needs. And on the negative side, you can have an unbalanced portfolio because you're only getting IP on what you invented, not IP on what you need. On the plus side, this is a good way to identify unexpected opportunities. Because if all you did was IP design, you wouldn't be thinking about unexpected opportunities. Inventions are, by definition, unexpected. In any case, in order to do IP design, your management has to be IP savvy because they have to help you understand or agree with your analysis of what IPs they need. Invention driven needs good management. Otherwise, all you're going to be doing is filing invention patents for what is cool. And if you want to enjoy the benefits of IP, of invention driven, then you need to have the ability to identify opportunities, both the IP manager and the rest of the management. Otherwise, you're going to have the downsides unbalanced without the upsides. Talking about invention, but I hope it's clear that it doesn't have to be an invention, it could be a pre-invention. So if we look a second at invention-driven filings, it's kind of like a marketing funnel. Any of you who've gotten spam mail know what I'm talking about. You get a stupid piece of mail saying new wall hanger only 52 cents. 10,000 people get that email. 9,000 delete it. 1,000 might click on it. And then they get to a web page where they're shown 20 different products that nobody needs. And out of those, 100 might click on one of the products. And out of those, 10 might decide to buy that product. Okay? Amazon does it to me all the time. So I just delete the emails. Okay? But that's a method of doing marketing, and putting aside whether it's good or not good. When you do invention-driven filing, you should look at it the same way. There are a lot of photo ideas that, are not really there yet. Actual ideas, whatever the word idea means, you have fewer. Ideas that are apparently valuable, you have even fewer. And ideas that are apparently valuable and that are enabled, meaning you can file on, are even fewer. Okay, but if you don't start with a big funnel at the beginning of a lot of photo ideas, you might not get these valuable ideas at the end. And one of the jobs of IP management is to attract the proto ideas to get into the funnel, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but more important, to push the ideas through the funnel, to make sure the ideas get improved and make it all the way through. And when you're doing that, you also have the opportunity to do IP design based on one of these ideas. Sometimes these ideas highlight a problem or an issue which should be interesting for the company. In any case, it means that IP management, if they want to use invention-driven filing and get good value, they need to give significant attention to early stage ideas and discovery, and maybe even more important, to the people behind these ideas. Because if somebody comes to you with a stupid idea and you tell them it's stupid, you might never see them again. And it also means that a lot of these ideas need time to develop. And if you know, when you fish and you catch a small fish, you throw it back into the water, maybe in a month it'll be big. You can catch it again. So one of the things we recommend is having what I call an idea list, where you list all of these not so good, incomplete ideas, and you go over it regularly, and you ask yourself, do I understand this idea better? Maybe now we can combine two ideas in order to make something better. Maybe now we understand why there's value. And remember that understanding what an inventor invented, when the inventors themselves don't understand what they did, is an ongoing project. Once you have an idea, you have to do the whole thing all over again in order to get a quality patent disclosure, but that's not the subject today. I'm positive you've all heard the concept of invention mining. And it involves some sort of process where a miner goes to visit the R&D department or something of the sort and talks to people and comes out with a list of ideas that can be turned into patents, perhaps. And don't worry, I'm not ignoring trade secrets. But what I don't like about this metaphor of mining is that it's a suitcase metaphor that can mean a lot of different things to different people. And let me give you an example from mining silver. Okay, you know, silver that you make jewelry out of. Sometimes you just find it lying around, chunk of silver, like a chunk of gold. Sometimes you need to dig in the ground to find this chunk of silver. Sometimes you have to do refining, and I just read a paper on how the refining of silver in Spain during the period of the Roman Empire caused lead poisoning in America. Crazy. And looking for ore where you might have these ideas can also be a very long and uncertain process. And when you do invention mining, it's exactly the same. Sometimes you have inventions that are ready to collect. Okay, if you come to a company that nobody's done any mining in the past year, you have inventors with ideas and just want to tell you, these ideas might need improving, but you just pick it up off the ground. Sometimes you have to put together ideas from different departments to get something useful. Sometimes that invention doesn't even exist, but it could exist. And if you tell the people to start digging, they'll actually find the invention. And usually, what I call prospecting, you need to talk to inventors and stakeholders, and you need to learn the market, and you need to learn the competition in order to help you find the inventions. So until now, what we had was you have an IP portfolio and it can grow in various ways. And one of the things that we can do is invention mining. The question is, once I created an invention, what happened? And here I'm talking about compounding. And it's said that Albert Einstein said that the most powerful force in the universe is compound interest. Well, that's exactly what happens in startup companies. Why? Because wisdom and knowledge can compound. How does that work? The beginning, everybody knows the same thing. But then you know something, or you know how to do something, or you just happen to be able to do something that other people are not doing. You do it, and that creates new IP in the sense of new knowledge. It's not necessarily registered. It could be a trade secret. So what do? One possibility is, you just find a pattern and forget about it. Another possibility is that you do compounding. What if you keep it a secret and then you use your secret abilities to generate something even newer? I mentioned before, you have a company which generated a sensing system. Now they can use it to make all sorts of measurements on the human body, which have never been made before. Once they make all of these measurements on the human body and get data nobody had before, they can now check to see if these are pathologies. Now that they check to see if these are pathologies, they can check to see if they can treat them. Okay? Each one of these steps is only possible because of the particular IP that you have that other people don't have. So you're not only growing, you're also growing ahead of the competition. So if you're doing compounding, that's good. So the question is, how do you prevent your competitors from enjoying this exact same compounding? Part of the answer is make sure that they don't have what you know. At the same time, we have the flip problem, which is making sure that your company takes advantage of it. We go back to my example of a company with a sensor, but which only cares about broken bones. Becomes very difficult to convince people to spend any effort whatsoever on applications which don't have to do with the vision of the company. And your job as an IP manager is to highlight the potential value of compounding and the cost so that they can make the right decision. Now, I talked about IP, but more generally, data and user relationships are also a source of compounding. Okay, if only you have a connection with the relevant segment of the market, something you protect using a trademark, of course, then you're able to experiment on this segment and see what they like to buy. If you see what they like to buy, you know what to sell them. And then you can find out more about what they want to buy, and you get compounding of your knowledge. In addition, being the first one to do something or being aware of something automatically gives you the potential to compound. Like I said, you have to seize it. Going back to a second to the issue of how do you grow, and one of the ways you grow is that you set up your company and the IP management in a way that will grow you by design. Now, if you're growing by design, it would be really nice if somebody else does most of the work. Why? Because you're limited. If we go back to that theoretical company I mentioned before, they have a sensor, but they don't have people who can try it out on things that are not bones. How about they allow researchers, okay, to use that sensor to discover other things about the body. However, the IP rights come back to you. The professor gets a paper and you get a patent. So what's happening here is that some of the compounding is happening outside the company, which is of course always scary. It's a type of open innovation. But what you do is you set up the system in your company so that this IP will flow into your company. For example, we have TTOs where the license explicitly requires licensing back or ownership to the TTO of any invention made as a consequence of using the licensed invention. Okay? So if you license a sensor from this company and you discover that sensor can detect something, that also belongs to the university. More advanced is ecosystem control. In ecosystem control, what you want to do is to make IP created, which is valuable for your company, even if you don't own it, but it's still compounding in your direction. If you think of the app stores or social networks like TikTok, that's exactly what's happening. TikTok is controlling the social network so that IP is created, this content, it's copyright, and it's created in a way which is especially valuable for TikTok. So TikTok's IP portfolio is growing, even though perhaps the IP doesn't legally belong to them. It really doesn't matter what the rules say. What matters is that the IP is being created. TikTok is not spending money, and TikTok is enjoying it. Also, if you have a lower level of ecosystem control, it helps you figure out where you should grow to. Because you see which directions are exciting, which directions people are working on. And of course, you know it before anybody else because you have control of the ecosystem and you're getting data. Mention streamlining. We all work in IP, and I'm sad to say IP is very bureaucratic. And it doesn't matter if it's justified. Wherever I look, IP is very bureaucratic. If you solve that, the growth is automatically enhanced. You get better quality, you get faster speed, which part of that increases quality, you get lower costs, and you get lower delays. And what you need to do as an IP manager is figuring out what is slowing down the IP generating cycle. And there's always something slowing down. And why is there always something slowing down? Because most companies, in order to exist, must have IP slowing processes. Otherwise, they would fall apart. Okay? IP and inventions in general are disruptive on many levels. They're disruptive to the company because the company might start defocusing. They're disruptive to a product because suddenly it gets feature bloat and so on. And the engineers are working on the future instead of the present. It's disruptive on a personal level because your engineers are now busy with other stuff. And it's disruptive on a social level because you want the company to be stable, perhaps, but now it's not. The whole society of how people interact in the company are changing. So it really is inherent that any company worth its salt has processes which are especially tweaked for slowing down IP generation. And whether it's intentional or not doesn't really matter. If you want to grow, you have to be aware of it. So what do most companies do? Instead of solving the problems, they add another one. And this is invention encouragement. There's all sorts of incentive programs. You give money when you file a patent, you give money when the patent is granted, you give a weekend. Here, look, I got from Microsoft a cube, which thanks me for my inventive contribution to Microsoft. I didn't know I would get it, so it's not very incentive, and it didn't work for Microsoft, so it was even less effective. And now I'm not going to talk whether it's any money. Okay, I did not get money for it. I just got these cool black bricks. But the reason why these are required is because you have a built-in friction on IP generation and built-in pushback. And the most important type of pushback that you have to be aware of is that any invention interferes with the task, the goals, and the focus of the inventor. Most inventors in a company, their job is not inventing, their job is making sure the widget works. And if they have a new idea, and now they go talk to the IP manager about the new idea, that's an hour where they didn't make the widget work. And while they're thinking about the new idea, they're not thinking about the problems in the widget. So some programs also divide up this bonus in order to make sure that you get support the whole way through, that the inventors will be supportive until the patent is granted and not just until it's filed. There's a lot in here. Do you want to encourage inventions? Do you want to encourage successful inventions? Do you want to encourage filings? Do you want to encourage joinings? But even if the company doesn't see the inventions as being disruptive, companies have an economic need to suppress inventions simply because change is bad if you're not planning for it. It's risky, that's for sure. Filing patents is expensive. Okay, so what you need to look at is how is a company suppressing inventions, not only adding friction on the process, but how is it suppressing? At the same time, you're giving people bonuses. Yeah. Which also means that we're going to need to do triage. Every time an idea comes, we have to decide, should we suppress it or should we encourage it? So invention management is sometimes part of the job of the IP manager, but you have to be aware that you have a lot of forces happening here. And I think that what's super important is having the right culture. I actually called it correct culture. Really depends on what your company wants to do, what kind of disruption is okay. If you might remember, Google used to have this 20% rule that people had 20% time off to do what they wanted. And we've been told that that's how we got Gmail. Okay, so I'm not going to say whether I think that's what happened or not, but that is a partial solution for encouraging people to be creative, but not disrupting what the company is doing, while still allowing the company to decide if they want to take advantage of these inventions. Okay, it's a nice idea. So if you're the IP manager, and I hope you're aware that management is about processes, it's not just about individual events. So you need to build up processes that work, and you need to monitor processes that you built or other people's processes. So here's a list of a few growth-related processes that you should be thinking about. First of all, is there any process for identifying not the IP itself, but the need or the opportunity or the justification for having IP? And the reason why this is so important is because you want to tie the IP portfolio to the business needs. Are there any processes for creating an inflow of IP? Are there any processes for turning ideas into actual IP items? I talked about the funnel before, but what processes do you have for triage and for managing the balance that I talked about and for reining in overproductive inventors? What about processes for getting rid of IP? Talk about that in a second. In general, you have processes that either help or hinder the growth of your IP portfolio. I'm reminding you, the subject of this talk is you have an IP portfolio and it grows. So you have things that help it grow and things that don't help it grow. And last but not least, the basic processes which kill IP intentionally or not, like publishing in conferences, creating IP, either by you or by people working for you, and identifying IP. So all of these processes, one of the jobs of the IP manager, if they care about the growing of the IP portfolio, is to be aware of them and to ask, are they doing what they should be doing? How should we control them? Should we change them? Till now, I've been talking as if patents is what it's all about, but obviously it's not. First of all, trade secrets are automatically generated and continuously generated as the company operates. Company operates, it generates secrets, and it loses them because it publishes them, doesn't keep them secret, and so on. Know-how and knowledge also have the same problem. They're always being generated, and unless you have the right processes in place, they get lost. Trademarks. I'm not talking about registered trademarks, but actual trademarks. Salespeople and marketing are always creating new trademarks, and they're also doing it by mistake. You have a salesperson met with a client, he says some sort of slogan, and the client's eyes light up. Okay? That could be a trademark, but if they don't tell anybody, it won't be. Of course, unlike patents, having a lot of trademarks can be confusing. But the very fact that you've identified different potential trademarks has value to help you understand how to segment your market. But the same issue of compounding and of growing. Designs. If you think about the design of an industrial process, usually you have prototype A, then you have prototype B, then you have prototype C, then you have final prototype D. Each one of those previous prototypes is a design which could be protected as a design patent or whatever the law is in different countries. Some of them you should protect, but more important, if you have a series of design options, there's often some sort of more general concept that the designers have, which you should understand what it is and protect it. And of course, that's growing your portfolio. In what direction do you grow? Okay, we wanted to grow and we understand we want to control the way in which the portfolio is growing. What does it mean to grow? Well, you can grow laterally, which means just more other markets. You can grow vertically, meaning now I'm going to cover my suppliers, I'm going to cover my distributors. You can add extra layers of coverage. I have IP, I have a patent, and I have another patent and another patent. Okay, it's a bigger portfolio. We can talk about time. We can grow to cover things that will happen next year, in 5 years, in 10 years, in 10 years in a market which doesn't exist yet. We can grow to cover the competition. You know, a lot of people don't file patents specifically for the competition. Competition and partners are really two words which mean the same thing, usually. So here too, you can grow in that direction. More generally, here's some types of IP which are often an easy win because most patent portfolios don't have them. That's IP for supporting transactions, for licensing, for all sorts of failure modes a company might have, for making the investor like you, for controlling the ecosystem, and very low probability IP, meaning the chance of it happening is very low. But if it happens, it's a game changer. So often people don't have that, but you definitely should have a few. So I said how you might grow, but the growth is often constrained psychologically. So here's one example. The company has lots of new inventions, but all of them match the company vision. That's especially a problem when you have a founder with a very strong personality and people don't file patents which don't match the vision of that founder. The problem with that is that IP portfolio has a task of providing alternatives and thinking about the competition. And if you're too focused on the company vision, you're not going to get there. Another reason is self-censorship. I said before about the inventor that comes with an idea and you poo-poo it and he never comes back. Sometimes the inventors do come back, but they come back with inventions you like. Thomas Edison was like that. His first invention was a machine to help people vote, in the parliament and the Congress. And nobody wanted it. And then he swore he'd never invent something which doesn't have a market. Who knows what he might have invented, him or the people working for him, if he wouldn't have made that vow. So how do we avoid these blinders? Well, I'd say the usual ways. One, use outside consultants, which don't have the same blinders, they have different ones. You intentionally put away time, resources, budget for these ideas, or you make an explicit statement of things that you want that are not part of what the company has. Now, the opposite of blinders is you have an inventor with their own pet idea. Let's say you have an inventor who loves hydraulics, okay? And let's say you're in robots, like Boston Dynamics, and you're building hydraulic robots. That inventor is not going to come to you, perhaps, with inventions that are electric motor based. So it's not blinders, but it's a fact. The solution to that is to have inventor diversity. Make sure you have inventors that love different things. Mentioned before some things that can drive the portfolio growth. I have a slightly more detail here of typical examples. You suddenly get money. That's like giving somebody anabolic steroids. The muscles start puffing up, but it's not really good for you. You get budget. The office of the chief scientist is an example, grants, and so on. Company gets a grant, they say, let's file a patent. You make a discovery and you grow your portfolio even before you really know what you discovered. Internal politics can cause the need to grow portfolio. Investors, the CEO might get a wake-up call, and it really doesn't matter how he gets it, but then you get a call, hello, IP department, yes, we need more patents. If you're getting ready for some IP battle, you might sign a contract which requires you to deal with IP. I mentioned competitors before. Competitors are doing something visibly, you might grow. That suggests that if you don't want your competitors to file more IP, maybe they should know that you are. You can't really resist any of these triggers, and I'm not saying you should, but you should be channeling them in a direction which is good for the company. Okay, so that's why we grow. Why don't we grow? It is very unusual to have a lack of ideas that can be turned into IP. But if you just in order to make sure, you should be collecting more ideas than you can deal with. So usually when somebody says there's no ideas, what they mean is we're not collecting them properly. Real limits are, for example, lack of attention. Okay, a company's building a widget now, but IP is about the future and it's about other people. And you just don't have attention for it. Or there's a resource problem. Money could be an issue, but it's usually not the real issue. The real issue is usually engineer time, they're too busy. Management time, they're also too busy to think about it. And even the IP manager themselves might be focusing on existing IP, and that's why they're not thinking about growing the portfolio. If you can't conceive of the value for the new IP, you're not going to grow. I had a company with an investor said, potential investor, they have too much IP. Okay, that's it. They stopped filing patents the next day. And this is especially true if nobody can justify the IP budget and the size of the portfolio. Sometimes company culture limits you, and sometimes you have poisoning. My father tells of the companies that he worked in where they had an inventor incentive program, and it was so good that that's what everybody did the whole day. They were just making inventions and filing invention disclosures instead of actually working on the product. But when that happens, company's going to choke you. So you can have limits to growth, but you can also shrink. The most traumatic type of shrinkage is when your portfolio crashes. Get a call from the client, he says, no money, we're shutting down, or we're only keeping half of our patents, or whatever. I don't need to say that you shouldn't get to that point. You should know ahead of time. You should be regularly pruning if you dare to do it. It's not easy. You should be always matching the portfolio to what the company needs. You should be able to talk about the value and justify the value. That way you won't have these crashes. And one thing you can do is you can sell IP or you can license the IP with its expenses. One of the things they do in some TTOs is you license a patent, and when you license it, you pay for all the costs on the patent until now, and you're responsible for all the costs moving forward. So the TTO has effectively shrunk all of the costs on the portfolio, but not the portfolio itself. There's also internal shrinkage, which means that you accept a narrower claim than you could if you were arguing. So the portfolio might look the same, but then when you have a phone call with a client and they say, oh, this patent doesn't cover what we want to do, the answer is you decided to shrink your portfolio. And last but not least, I've seen this, it's fake growth. That's usually with the IP manager. They collect invention disclosures and they collect trade secrets. They have a lot of, but the company actually needs patents. So the portfolio is not growing or even shrinking, but it looks as if it's growing because you have more and more files open. I mentioned pruning. Pruning is very important. In trees, you cut the number of, reduce the number of branches so that all of the plant's energy will go into branches which will give you more fruit or make the tree grow in the direction you want it to go. If you don't prune, you can get a complete mess. IP portfolios can also become a complete mess. It is really, really, really difficult to cut away living IP. It's less difficult if you can see how cutting will help your portfolio grow in better directions. And all I can say is it's really difficult to do it. But one easy example, if you file a PCT national phase, how many countries do you file? If you file in fewer countries, you can put more energy into those countries that you chose. So I'll just say it again. There's a limit to how much attention a company can give to IP. You have to make sure it counts, which means IP which requires attention and doesn't provide value is interfering with the rest of it. And there are a lot of different situations where the portfolio needs to grow and they're not the same at all. Here's a few examples. Starvation, reboot, old age, pivot. Basically, what happens is the company got old or died in the middle, and now you need a different IP portfolio. Sometimes you have fattening up for the market. You want to show that you have 20 pounds of IP. It's true that people care less about the value, but still you have to be able to show that some of those patents have value. Sometimes a company is changing. Instead of being a sneaky startup with 2 patents that cover the product, you want to become a big player. Big players, they have lots of IP, but also what they do with the IP is going to change. Sometimes, which should happen more often, management says, okay, we have a need. Let's grow our IP in order to solve that need. Just make sure that you keep some budget for the rest of it. Different stages of a company, when it's doing development, when it's doing product market fit, when it's doing distribution, when it's trying to monopolize the market, each one needs different type of IP. I'm just emphasizing that just because you finished your technological IP, that doesn't mean that you're done creating IP. It means that now you can create really valuable IP. It's just different. Now, I haven't talked about how you do the growing. I'll just say that it usually involves talking to lots of people in order to identify possible directions which would be interesting. Yeah. Is budget good or bad? So every time we hear the client say we don't have a budget for it, so it's considered to be something bad. And sometimes the IP manager says, oh my God, we don't have a budget. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And it blocks them. But you should really be looking at budget as a signal. If you're getting the budget from up on top, it means that your IP is not tied to value creation, at least in the minds of the people above you. When the budget comes bottom up, you make a proposal for what you need, by explaining how it creates value, you guide the growth that you want management to agree to. So budgeting, whether top down or bottom up, is a way to explain or to force you to explain the value of the IP. But if we talk about budgeting, there are all sorts of tools people use to delay costs. One of them is, let's keep the invention as a secret. You can't always do it, and I guarantee it's not for free. Another one is, let's find one application with a lot of inventions. Problem is, none of the inventions get the kind of attention that it needs. Another one is, let's file one application and then file divisionals. A lot of countries don't like that. China, Europe, and now the US. They make it difficult. Brazil. But more important, how likely is it the specification will actually support all of these divisionals you want to use? Another one, favorite, I agree, is filing a PCT. If you file a PCT, it delays your course by 2 years, 3 years sometimes. Depends, on the timing. Yes, I know PCT is 2.5 years, but complicated. But what it does is that while you're in the PCT process and for a year later, you don't have any opportunity to show that your IP is creating value. All you can say is, we filed an application. And all I want to say here is that there's other ways of growing your portfolio. One of them is preventing your competition from growing. And the other one is all sorts of joining together patent pools, a covenant not to sue, cross-licensing patents. I have a critical patent, I license it to other people. Becoming part of a standard where you have friend licensing. It's true that doesn't give you all of the benefits of growing your portfolio, but some of the benefits of having a bigger portfolio are achieved. Because remember, if you grow your portfolio and your competitors grow your portfolio, the balance hasn't changed, except that the patent attorneys have been paid a lot of money, and if we ever get to court, the lawyers will be paid a lot of money. So it could be that you don't want to actually grow your portfolio, and instead just agreeing with your competitors that you won't sue each other is way cheaper and, has the same effect. In summary, portfolios grow, and if you know why and how, you can make it grow the right way. And different reasons for growing require you to use different techniques for growing. And you should probably be using multiple ways at once. Budgeting is your friend. And just take home is be passive, reactive, and proactive. If we just think about an example story, here we have a company. They make sprinkler heads that when you drive your lawnmower over them, don't get damaged. They're selling $300 million a year and they only have 3 patents. Yes, they need to grow their portfolio. So just imagine that you get the task of growing their portfolio, and what does that task even look like? Okay, I am stopping the recording.